The day my son told me I should be grateful for a spare room in my own house was the day I decided he needed to learn what gratitude really meant. My name is Vivian. I'm 58 years old, and I raised that boy to respect his elders clearly. I failed somewhere along the way. It started on a Tuesday morning in March when the cherry blossoms were just beginning to bloom outside my kitchen window. I was making my usual breakfast of scrambled eggs and wheat toast, listening to the morning news, when Marcus walked into the kitchen like he owned the place, which, according to him, he practically did. "Morning, Mom," he said, not looking up from his phone as he grabbed the orange juice from the refrigerator and drank straight from the carton. At 32 years old, he still acted like a teenager sometimes. "Good morning, honey," I replied, biting my tongue about the orange juice. "Pick your battles, Vivian," I told myself. "Save your energy for the wars that matter." Marcus had moved back home 3 years ago after his divorce from Jennifer. What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement while he got back on his feet had stretched into something that felt increasingly permanent. At first, I was happy to help. What mother wouldn't want to support her child during a difficult time? But as the months turned into years, I began to feel like a stranger in my own home. The house had been mine and Robert's dream home. We'd bought it 28 years ago when Marcus was just 4 years old. Robert had worked double shifts at the manufacturing plant while I cleaned offices at night to save up for the down payment. We'd sacrificed vacations, new clothes, and countless dinners out to afford the mortgage payments on this modest 3-bedroom ranch house with its small but well-maintained yard. Robert had been gone for 5 years now. Heart attack at 59, sudden and devastating. The life insurance had paid off the mortgage, leaving me with a home that was fully mine but felt impossibly empty without his laughter filling the rooms. When Marcus moved back in, I thought it would help with the loneliness. Instead, it created a different kind of isolation. He treated the house like his personal hotel, complete with maid service. Dishes piled up in the sink until I washed them. Laundry overflowed from his hamper until I couldn't stand the smell anymore. The living room became his domain, with his gaming system permanently hooked up to my television and his belongings scattered across every surface. "I've been thinking," Marcus said that Tuesday morning, finally putting down his phone and looking at me with the expression he used when he was about to ask for something. "Jennifer wants to start bringing the kids over for weekend visits." My heart lifted slightly. I missed my grandchildren Emma, who was 8, and little Jacob, who had just turned 5. Since the divorce, I'd only seen them a handful of times, usually brief encounters at restaurants or parks when Jennifer was feeling generous. "That would be wonderful," I said, already imagining Emma's laughter echoing through the house again. "They could stay in the guest room and—" "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." Marcus interrupted. "I'm going to need that room for the kids. It makes more sense for them to have their own space when they're here." I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. The guest room? But that's where I keep my sewing machine and all my craft supplies, and where Aunt Helen sleeps when she visits from Atlanta. Marcus shrugged as if my concerns were trivial. "You can move all that stuff somewhere else, and Aunt Helen hardly ever visits anyway. Maybe once a year?" "Twice a year," I corrected quietly. "Christmas and summer." "Right, so it's not like she needs a permanent setup. You've got that little office area off the living room. You could put an air mattress in there or something when she comes." The little office area he was referring to was barely large enough for a desk and a filing cabinet. Robert and I had used it to pay bills and store important documents. The idea of my 73-year-old sister sleeping on an air mattress in that cramped space made my stomach turn. "Marcus, I understand you want the children to be comfortable, but that room serves multiple purposes. My sewing area is important to me. It's how I make extra income with alterations and custom work. And Helen has been using that room for visits since we moved into this house." Marcus's face took on the impatient expression he'd worn as a teenager, when I'd ask him to clean his room or do his homework. Mom, you need to be realistic here. I'm paying rent and I need space for my kids. You should be grateful I'm even giving you notice instead of just moving your stuff out myself. The words hit me like a physical blow. Grateful. I should be grateful that my son was allowing me to have input on changes to my own home. Paying rent? I repeated slowly. Marcus, you give me $300 a month. That barely covers the increase in utilities and groceries since you moved in. $300 is $300, he said defensively. And it's not like you need more money. The house is paid off, your car is paid off, and you've got Dad's life insurance money sitting in the bank. I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment. The life insurance money was my security net, my safety blanket in a world that felt increasingly unstable. It was what allowed me to sleep at night, knowing that if something happened to my health, or if I couldn't work anymore, I wouldn't lose my home. That money is for emergencies and my future care, I said firmly. It's not for subsidizing your living expenses. Marcus rolled his eyes. Look, Mom, I'm not trying to be difficult here. I'm just saying that this arrangement works better for everyone if we're practical about it. You've got this whole house, and you're using the guest room maybe 10% of the time. I need it for my kids who are going to be here every other weekend. And what about my needs? What about my sister's visits? What about my sewing business? You can sew at the kitchen table, he said dismissively. That's what most people do. And like I said, Aunt Helen can figure something else out. Maybe she can stay at a hotel. The suggestion that my sister should pay for a hotel room rather than stay in the guest room of a house she'd been visiting for decades was so outrageous that I couldn't immediately respond. Helen was on a fixed income, living on Social Security, and a small pension from her years as a school secretary. The cost of a hotel would be a real hardship for her. But more than the practical concerns, it was Marcus's attitude that left me speechless. The casual dismissal of my needs, the assumption that his priorities automatically trumped mine, the way he spoke about my house as if he had equal say in how it was used. I need to think about this, I said finally. Marcus grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl and headed toward the door. Don't think too long, Mom. Jennifer wants to bring the kids this weekend, and I want to have their room ready. After he left for work, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the half-eaten breakfast on my plate. The eggs had grown cold, but I didn't have the energy to reheat them or throw them away. Instead, I found myself remembering the day Robert and I had first walked through this house with our real estate agent. We'd been looking for months, driving through neighborhoods every weekend, attending open houses, and making offers on properties that always seemed to slip through our fingers. This house hadn't even been on our list. We'd stumbled across it while driving home from another disappointing viewing, drawn by the "For Sale" sign in the front yard, and the way the afternoon light fell across the front porch. It's perfect, Robert had whispered as we stood in the living room, sunlight streaming through the large windows that faced east. Can you see Marcus learning to ride his bike in that backyard? Can you picture Christmas mornings in this room? I could see it all. I could imagine the life we'd build within these walls, the memories we'd create, the security we'd finally achieve after years of renting apartments and scraping together first month's rent and security deposits. We'd made an offer that same day, stretching our budget to the absolute limit and beyond. For years afterward, we'd lived on rice and beans, generic cereal, and clothing from thrift stores. Robert had taken on extra shifts whenever they were available, sometimes working 16-hour days when the plant needed overtime help. I'd cleaned offices from 6 in the evening until midnight, then come home to take care of Marcus and manage the household. Every sacrifice had been worth it because this house represented something more than just shelter. It was our stake in the American dream, our guarantee that Marcus would have stability and security that Robert and I had never known as children. Now, 30 years later, That same child was telling me I should be grateful for whatever space he decided to allow me in the home I'd worked so hard to provide. I picked up my phone and called my sister Helen in Atlanta. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm and familiar. Vivian, how lovely to hear from you. I was just thinking about you yesterday when I saw a cardinal in my backyard. Remember how you always said cardinals were good luck? Hi, Helen, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm calling because I need to talk to you about something. Of course, honey. What's wrong? You sound upset. I told her about my conversation with Marcus, about his plan to take over the guest room and his suggestion that she stay in a hotel during her visits. Helen listened without interrupting, making small sounds of sympathy and understanding. Oh, Vivian, she said when I finished. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. You know I don't mind staying somewhere else if it would help. Absolutely not, I interrupted. This is your home too. You've been visiting this house for almost 30 years. You helped us paint the guest room when we first moved in. You've been here for every major holiday, every crisis, every celebration. I won't have you staying in some hotel because my son has forgotten his manners. Helen was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I'm tired of being treated like a guest in my own home. After we hung up, I walked through the house slowly, seeing it with fresh eyes. In the living room, Marcus's belongings dominated every surface. His laptop and charging cables were spread across the coffee table where Robert and I used to keep photo albums and decorative candles. His shoes were kicked off by the front door, creating an obstacle course for anyone trying to enter. His gym bag sat in the corner, emanating a smell that suggested his workout clothes needed attention. The kitchen showed similar signs of occupation. His protein powders and supplements filled half of one cabinet. His special organic milk took up premium space in the refrigerator door. The freezer contained mostly frozen dinners and ice cream that he preferred, leaving little room for the vegetables and homemade meals I liked to prepare. But it was the guest room that really drove home the extent of his presumption. I stood in the doorway, looking at the space that had been my sanctuary. My grandmother's antique sewing machine sat in the corner, surrounded by bins of fabric and supplies I'd collected over years of crafting. The shelves held books I'd inherited from my mother, photo albums from Marcus's childhood, and keepsakes from my marriage to Robert. This wasn't just a spare room. It was a repository of my history, my interests, my connections to the past and future. The idea of dismantling it to make space for occasional weekend visits felt like erasing a part of myself. I thought about my sewing business, which had grown from a hobby into a reliable source of income over the past few years. Word of mouth had brought me clients who needed alterations for special occasions, custom curtains for their homes, and repairs for beloved garments. The work gave me purpose and financial independence. It also connected me to other women in the community who appreciated craftsmanship and attention to detail. Just last week, Mrs. Patterson from down the street had brought me her mother's wedding dress, asking if I could alter it for her daughter's upcoming ceremony. The dress was a delicate silk creation from 1953, requiring careful handling and precise alterations. I'd spent hours studying the construction, planning each modification to preserve the original design while updating the fit for a modern bride. "You're an artist," Mrs. Patterson had said when she picked up the finished dress. "My daughter is going to feel like a princess." The payment for that job had covered my grocery expenses for 2 weeks. More importantly, the work had given me a sense of accomplishment and connection that I cherished. Now, Marcus wanted me to give up my workspace so he could occasionally host his children. Children I loved dearly, but saw so rarely that they felt like strangers when they did visit. That evening, Marcus came home from work in an unusually good mood. He'd gotten a promotion at the insurance company where he worked, which meant a raise and better benefits. Over dinner, He talked excitedly about his plans for the future. Jennifer seems more open to working out a better custody arrangement, he said between bites of the pot roast I'd made. She thinks having a proper setup for the kids will show I'm serious about being involved in their lives. That's wonderful, Marcus, I said, genuinely happy that he wanted to be a better father. The children need you in their lives. Exactly, and having their own room here will make such a difference. They'll feel like this is really their home too, not just some place they visit occasionally. I noticed he didn't mention whether I would feel like it was still my home. Have you thought about looking for your own place? I asked carefully. Now that you're getting a promotion, maybe you could afford a 2-bedroom apartment where the children could have their own space. Marcus looked at me as if I'd suggested he move to Mars. Why would I do that when this works so well? I'd be paying twice as much for half the space. Besides, the kids love coming to Grandma's house. It wouldn't be the same in some generic apartment complex. But this arrangement was supposed to be temporary, I reminded him. You moved in after your divorce to get back on your feet. It's been 3 years now. And it's worked out great for both of us, he said, completely missing the point. You don't have to worry about being alone in this big house, and I get to save money while spending time with my mom. It's a win-win situation. I wondered when my feelings about the arrangement had stopped mattering to him. When had my preferences become irrelevant to decisions about my own home? What if I want to have friends over? I asked. What if I want to redecorate or change things around? What if I decide I want to travel more and don't want to worry about maintaining a house? Marcus shrugged. You can do whatever you want, Mom. Just work around the kids' schedule and let me know if you're going to be gone for more than a few days. I can keep an eye on things while you're away. The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. He was treating me like a child who needed permission and supervision rather than the homeowner and adult I actually was. After dinner, I called my neighbor Dorothy, who lived 2 houses down and had become a good friend since Robert's death. Dorothy was 65 and had raised 4 children as a single mother after her husband left when the youngest was still in diapers. He moved back in after his divorce? Dorothy asked when I told her about my situation. Honey, I've seen this story before. My eldest son tried the same thing when his marriage fell apart. Wanted to move back into his childhood bedroom at age 35. What did you do? I told him he had 60 days to find his own place. Gave him a written notice and everything. He pitched a fit, called me heartless, said I was abandoning him in his time of need. But you know what? He found an apartment within 6 weeks and realized he was perfectly capable of taking care of himself. But what about the grandchildren? Marcus says this arrangement is better for them. Dorothy laughed, but not unkindly. Oh, sweetheart, that's the oldest manipulation in the book, using the grandchildren as emotional blackmail. My son tried the same thing. But Mom, where will the kids play? They love coming to Grandma's house. You know what I told him? What? I told him that loving grandchildren means teaching them that adults have their own lives and boundaries. That grandparents can love their grandchildren without sacrificing their entire existence for convenience. My grandkids visit me in my own space, on my own terms, and our relationship is stronger because of it. After talking to Dorothy, I felt both validated and terrified. Validated because someone else understood my situation and didn't think I was being unreasonable. Terrified because I realized I might actually have to take action to change things. The next morning, I woke up to find Marcus had already started moving my sewing supplies out of the guest room. Boxes of fabric and notions were stacked in the hallway, and my grandmother's sewing machine had been unplugged and pushed against the wall. What are you doing? I asked, my voice sharper than I'd intended. I told you Jennifer wants to bring the kids this weekend, he said, without looking up from the box he was packing. I figured I'd get a head start on clearing out the room. I never agreed to this, Marcus. We discussed it, but I never said yes. He paused and looked at me with the patience one might show to a confused elderly person. Mom, be reasonable. The the kids need a place to sleep. Your sewing stuff can go anywhere. No, it can't go anywhere. This is where I work. This is my business. It's a hobby, Mom. Let's not make it sound like more than it is. A hobby. 3 years of building a client base, developing skills, creating beautiful pieces that brought joy to people's lives, and he called it a hobby. It's income, Marcus. It's work that I enjoy, and that helps pay for the groceries and utilities that have doubled since you moved in. You don't need the money, he said dismissively. And even if you did, you could do alterations at the kitchen table just as easily. I stood there watching my son dismantle my workspace without my permission, treating my belongings like they were obstacles to be moved rather than tools of a trade I'd worked years to develop. The casual dismissal of my needs, the assumption that his priorities automatically superseded mine, the complete lack of consideration for my feelings, it was all too much. Stop, I said quietly. What? Stop moving my things. Put everything back where you found it. Marcus straightened up, a box of fabric in his arms. Mom, we talked about this. The kids need a father who has his own place to offer them, I interrupted. They need a father who doesn't manipulate his mother into giving up her space and her work for his convenience. Manipulate? Marcus's voice rose. I'm trying to be a good father here. I thought you'd want to help with that. I do want to help, but not by sacrificing everything that matters to me so you can avoid the responsibility of creating your own home for your children. We stared at each other across the room, and for the first time in years, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. He'd grown so accustomed to my accommodation, my flexibility, my willingness to put his needs first, that my resistance caught him off guard. Fine, he said finally, setting down the box with unnecessary force. But don't blame me when Jennifer decides this isn't a suitable environment for the kids. After he left for work, I spent the morning putting everything back in its proper place. As I reorganized my sewing supplies, I thought about the conversation with Dorothy and about the years I'd spent accommodating Marcus's needs at the expense of my own. When had I stopped being a person with my own dreams and desires and become just a supporting character in my son's life? I remembered the woman I'd been before Robert died. I'd been involved in community theater, volunteering with the local historical society, and taking painting classes at the community college. I'd had plans to travel, to visit Helen more often, to maybe even take a cruise to Alaska like Robert and I had always talked about. Instead, I'd spent the last 3 years cooking meals that went unappreciated, cleaning up messes I didn't make, and gradually shrinking my life to accommodate someone who saw my sacrifices as his due. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my friend Patricia, who'd been asking me to join her book club for over a year. Vivian. Patricia's voice was delighted. I was just thinking about you. Are you finally ready to join us? We're reading the most wonderful novel about women supporting each other through difficult times. That sounds perfect, I said. When do you meet? Thursday evenings at 7. This week we're meeting at Susan's house on Maple Street. You'll love the group. There are 8 of us, all women over 50, who believe in speaking our minds and supporting each other. After I hung up, I realized I hadn't felt that spark of anticipation in years. The idea of spending time with women my own age, discussing books and ideas, creating connections based on shared interests rather than family obligation, it felt like coming back to life. That evening, Marcus came home with paint samples and fabric swatches. I've been thinking about how to decorate the kids' room, he announced, spreading the samples across the kitchen table where I was trying to eat my dinner. Emma loves purple and Jacob is obsessed with dinosaurs. Maybe we could do purple walls with dinosaur decals. I looked at him, this grown man who was planning to redecorate my guest room without any acknowledgement that I might have opinions about changes to my own home. Marcus, I said carefully, We need to have a serious conversation about your living situation here. He looked up from the paint samples with annoyance. Not this again, Mom. I thought we settled this. We haven't settled anything. You made demands, and I've been thinking about them. They're not demands. They're reasonable requests from your son who's trying to maintain a relationship with his children. Then let me make a reasonable request as the homeowner who's been subsidizing your lifestyle for 3 years. Something in my tone must have gotten his attention because he put down the fabric swatch he'd been examining and looked at me directly. I want you to start looking for your own place, I said. I'll give you 60 days to find somewhere else to live. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the refrigerator humming in the background. You're kicking me out? Marcus asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and hurt. I'm asking you to resume the adult independence you had before your divorce. I'm asking you to create a home for your children that doesn't require dismantling mine. But Mom, this arrangement works. It's practical. It saves money. It saves you money, I corrected. It costs me peace of mind, personal space, and the ability to live in my own home according to my own preferences. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I can't believe you're doing this. I can't believe you'd choose your sewing hobby over your own grandchildren. I'm not choosing my hobby over my grandchildren. I'm choosing my own life over your convenience. There's a difference. Where am I supposed to go? Do you have any idea how expensive rent is right now? You're 32 years old with a good job and a recent promotion. You'll figure it out the same way millions of other adults do. And what about the kids? What about their relationship with their grandmother? They can visit me here, in the guest room, the same way they would visit any other grandparent, the same way children have been visiting grandparents for generations. Marcus stared at me as if I'd become a stranger. I don't understand where this is coming from. We've been fine for 3 years. Why are you changing everything now? Because I finally realized that being fine for you has meant being invisible for me. Because I'm 58 years old, not 98, and I still have a life I want to live. He left the kitchen without another word, and I heard his bedroom door slam shut with a force that rattled the picture frames in the hallway. I sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by paint samples and fabric swatches for a room that would never be decorated according to his plans. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear or regret. I was shaking from the adrenaline of finally standing up for myself after years of bending over backward to accommodate everyone else's needs. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like the owner of my own home. The next morning, Marcus didn't speak to me. He moved through the kitchen like a storm cloud, grabbing his coffee and a piece of toast without making eye contact. The silent treatment was a tactic he'd perfected as a teenager, and apparently some things never change. I'd barely slept the night before, not from regret about my decision, but from the strange mix of relief and anxiety that comes with finally taking action after years of passive acceptance. Every time I'd started to second-guess myself, I'd remember his words about being grateful for a spare room in my own house, and my resolve strengthened. Around 10 that morning, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jennifer's name, and my heart sank. I knew Marcus had called her to complain about his unreasonable mother, who was ruining his chances at being a good father. "Hello, Jennifer," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Vivian, hi. I hope you don't mind me calling. Marcus told me about your conversation last night, and I wanted to talk to you about it." I braced myself for the guilt trip I was sure was coming. "Of course. What can I do for you?" "Actually, I wanted to thank you." The words were so unexpected that I thought I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Jennifer's laugh was soft and genuine. "I know that probably sounds strange, but I've been worried about Marcus for a while now. This whole living with his mother thing was supposed to be temporary, but it was starting to feel like he was using it to avoid dealing with his responsibilities." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, completely unprepared for this response. When he called me last night, he was furious, Jennifer continued. He said you were being selfish and unreasonable, but you know what? As he was telling me about your conversation, I realized you were absolutely right. He's 32 years old. He should be creating his own home for our children, not expecting you to rearrange your life around his needs. I was worried you'd think I was being terrible to the children, I admitted. The children barely know you, Vivian, and that's not your fault. It's ours. Marcus brings them over maybe once a month, and usually only for a few hours. They spend most of their time watching TV or playing video games while he does his own thing. That's not building a relationship, that's just convenient babysitting. Jennifer's words stung because they were true. I'd been so focused on the idea of having my grandchildren close that I'd ignored the reality of how little meaningful connection we actually had. I think this might be exactly what Marcus needs, Jennifer said. A push to grow up and take real responsibility. And honestly, I think it'll be better for Emma and Jacob too. They need to see their father as an independent adult, not someone who still needs his mother to take care of him. After we hung up, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Jennifer's support made me realize that I wasn't being unreasonable or selfish. I was being realistic about what was best for everyone involved. That afternoon, I drove to the library and checked out several books about setting boundaries with adult children. I'd never thought I'd need such resources, but clearly there were things about parenting that didn't end when your child turned 18. One book in particular caught my attention. It was written by a psychologist who specialized in family dynamics, and an entire chapter was devoted to the phenomenon of adult children who move back home and gradually take over their parents' lives. Boomerang children often rationalize their living situation by focusing on the benefits to their parents, the author wrote. They convince themselves they're doing their elderly parents a favor by providing companionship and security. In reality, they're often avoiding the challenges of independent adult life while slowly eroding their parents' autonomy and sense of ownership in their own homes. The description was so accurate it was unsettling. Marcus had used almost those exact arguments that I shouldn't be alone in such a big house, that it was good for both of us, that he was helping me as much as I was helping him. The book also discussed something called financial gaslighting, where adult children minimize their parents' legitimate financial concerns by suggesting they don't really need the money they're asking for. Marcus's dismissal of my sewing income and his casual references to Dad's life insurance money sitting in the bank fit this pattern perfectly. I spent the evening reading and taking notes, feeling both vindicated and sad. Vindicated because my feelings were legitimate and shared by many other parents in similar situations. Sad because I had to learn from a psychology book that my son was manipulating me instead of being able to trust his respect for my autonomy. The silent treatment continued for 3 days. Marcus would come and go without speaking, leaving dirty dishes in the sink and wet towels on the bathroom floor, with what seemed like deliberate carelessness. It was like living with a hostile stranger who happened to share my last name. On Thursday evening, I went to my first book club meeting at Susan's house. The group was exactly what Patricia had promised: 8 women between the ages of 52 and 67 who had opinions about everything and weren't afraid to share them. "So you're the one Patricia's been telling us about," said a woman named Carol who had silver hair and laugh lines around her bright blue eyes. "She says you're finally ready to reclaim your life." "Something like that," I said, feeling slightly embarrassed by the attention. "Don't be shy," said another woman, introducing herself as Nancy. "We've all been through it. Divorce, death, empty nest syndrome, difficult adult children, you name it. Someone in this group has survived it." The book we were discussing was about a woman who left her comfortable but unfulfilling life to start over in a small coastal town. As we talked about the protagonist's journey toward independence and self-discovery, I found myself sharing details about my own situation that I'd never discussed with anyone outside my family. Your son told you that you should be grateful for a spare room in your own house, Carol asked, her voice rising in indignation. Oh, honey, that boy needs a reality check. The guest room isn't even spare, Nancy pointed out. You use it for work and family visits. It's not sitting empty waiting for him to find a purpose for it. And even if it was, added Susan, it's your house. You get to decide how every room is used, not your adult son who pays $300 a month in rent. The validation was overwhelming. These women understood my situation instinctively because many of them had faced similar challenges with their own adult children. They didn't think I was being unreasonable or selfish. They thought I was being too accommodating. I gave my daughter 6 months to find her own place when she tried to move back in after college, said a quiet woman named Ruth. She called me heartless and said I didn't love her. But you know what? 5 years later, she thanked me. She said it was the push she needed to really become an adult. The hardest part is the guilt, Carol added. They're very good at making us feel like we're abandoning them when we're actually helping them grow up. I drove home from the book club feeling energized and supported in a way I hadn't experienced in years. These women had given me something Marcus never had: respect for my decisions and acknowledgement of my right to prioritize my own needs. When I got home, Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and papers spread around him. For a moment, I thought he might be working on his resume or apartment hunting. Then I saw what he was actually doing. He was researching elder care services and assisted living facilities. What's all this? I asked, setting my purse down and trying to keep my voice level. Marcus looked up with an expression of exaggerated concern. I've been thinking about your behavior lately, Mom. The sudden mood changes, the unreasonable demands, the hostility toward family. I'm worried you might be experiencing some kind of cognitive decline. The accusation hit me like a slap. Cognitive decline. It's nothing to be ashamed of, he said in the patronizing tone people use when they're pretending to be helpful while actually being cruel. It happens to a lot of people your age. The important thing is getting you the help you need before you make any major decisions you might regret. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised and sacrificed for, and realized he was trying to gaslight me into believing that standing up for myself was evidence of mental illness. What kind of major decisions? I asked quietly. Like asking me to move out, like disrupting a living arrangement that's working perfectly well, like prioritizing your hobbies over your family relationships. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. In Marcus's version of reality, my decision to reclaim my own home was evidence of cognitive problems rather than long overdue self-advocacy. I see, I said, pulling out my phone. So, if I'm experiencing cognitive decline, I probably shouldn't be living alone or making financial decisions, right? Well, eventually, yes, but we don't have to worry about that right now. Actually, I think we do need to worry about it right now, I interrupted, scrolling through my contacts. If I'm not mentally competent to ask my adult son to move out of my house, then I'm certainly not competent to own real estate or manage investments. Marcus looked confused. What are you talking about? I'm calling my real estate agent, I said, finding Janet's number and hitting call. If I can't be trusted to make decisions about my own home, then I should sell it before I do something really irresponsible. Mom, wait. Janet? Hi, it's Vivian Morrison. I know it's late, but I wanted to call and ask about putting my house on the market. Yes, I'm serious. No, I don't need to think about it more. My son thinks I'm having cognitive problems, so I should probably liquidate my assets while I still can. Marcus was staring at me with growing alarm as I continued the conversation with Janet, who was asking practical questions about timing and pricing and my plans for where I'd live after the sale. I'm thinking about that senior community near the lake, I told Janet, watching Marcus's face grow pale. the one with the activity center and the craft rooms. They have lovely one-bedroom apartments, and I wouldn't have to worry about maintaining a yard or dealing with household repairs. Mom, hang up the phone, Marcus said urgently. Oh, Marcus wants to talk, I told Janet. Can I call you back tomorrow to discuss the details? After I hung up, Marcus was looking at me like I'd lost my mind, which was ironic considering he just accused me of exactly that. You can't sell the house, he said. Why not? If I'm having cognitive decline, I shouldn't be managing property. You said so yourself. I didn't mean. I wasn't suggesting. You weren't suggesting what? That I should sell my assets while I'm still competent to make legal decisions. Because that's exactly what someone with cognitive decline should do. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, finally understanding that his manipulation tactic had backfired spectacularly. I don't actually think you have cognitive problems, he admitted. So you were lying when you said you were worried about my mental state. I was trying to make you understand that your decision doesn't make sense. My decision makes perfect sense. You're the one who's confused about how normal adult living arrangements work. Marcus closed his laptop and gathered up the papers about assisted living facilities. Okay, fine. You don't have cognitive problems, but you can't seriously be thinking about selling the house. I am seriously thinking about it, I said, and I realized I actually was. This house was perfect for a family with a young child. It's too big for one person, and the upkeep is getting expensive. Maybe it's time for a change. But this is the family home. This is where I grew up. This is where your grandchildren should grow up. My grandchildren aren't growing up here, I pointed out. They visit occasionally. And you're not growing up here either. You're 32 years old. That weekend, Janet came by to do a market evaluation. She walked through the house, taking measurements and photos, commenting on the original hardwood floors and the updated kitchen that Robert and I had renovated 5 years before his death. You've maintained this beautifully, she said as we stood in the living room. The market is very strong right now, especially for move, in ready homes in established neighborhoods. I think you'd have multiple offers within a week of listing. Marcus had made himself scarce during Janet's visit, but I could see him watching from his bedroom window as she took exterior photos and measurements of the yard. That evening, he emerged from his room and asked if we could talk. I've been thinking about what you said, he began, his tone more subdued than I'd heard in years, about finding my own place. Good, I said. Have you started looking? I've been checking some apartment listings online. There are some decent 2-bedroom places within my budget, especially if I look a little further out from downtown. It was the first time he'd acknowledged that finding his own place was actually possible, rather than a financial impossibility. That sounds promising, I said. The thing is, some of these places have waiting lists, or they want first month, last month, and security deposit up front. It might take a little longer than 60 days to get everything sorted out. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. He wasn't trying to manipulate or guilt-trip me. He was asking for help in a direct, honest way. How much longer do you think you'd need? I asked. Maybe 90 days total? That would give me time to save up for the deposits and find a place that's actually good for the kids to visit. It was a reasonable request from someone who was finally taking responsibility for his situation rather than expecting me to solve his problems. 90 days is fine, I said. But I want to see evidence that you're actively looking. I want to know about places you've contacted, applications you've submitted, deposits you're saving for. Fair enough, Marcus said. And Mom, I owe you an apology for the cognitive decline thing. That was really unfair. Yes, it was. I was scared about having to move out, and I handled it badly. I'm sorry. It wasn't a complete apology. Didn't acknowledge the years of taking advantage of my generosity. or the casual dismissal of my needs. But it was a start. Over the next few weeks, Marcus actually did start apartment hunting seriously. He showed me listings he was considering, talked about neighborhoods that would be convenient for his work commute and good for weekend visits with the kids. He even asked my opinion about which places I thought Emma and Jacob would like best. The change in his attitude was remarkable. Instead of treating me like an obstacle to his plans, he started consulting me like the experienced adult I actually was. He asked for advice about negotiating with landlords, about which neighborhoods were safest, about what amenities would be worth paying extra for. I found a place I really like, he told me one evening about 6 weeks into his 90-day deadline. It's a 2-bedroom in Riverside, about 15 minutes from here. The landlord says I can paint the kids' room and there's a playground across the street. That sounds perfect, I said. When can you move in? First of the month. I've already given him the deposit and I'm scheduled to sign the lease tomorrow. I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that he was following through on his commitment, pride that he was taking charge of his life, and yes, a little sadness that this chapter was ending. I'm proud of you, I told him. This is going to be good for everyone. I think so too, he said. And Mom, I talked to Jennifer about a more regular visitation schedule. We're thinking every other weekend and one evening during the week. The kids will actually have a real routine, a real relationship with me. That's wonderful, Marcus. And I'd like them to visit you too, not all the time, not in a way that takes over your space, but maybe one Saturday afternoon a month. We could plan activities, maybe take them to the park or the children's museum. It was exactly what I'd wanted: a relationship with my grandchildren that was intentional and planned rather than just convenient for their father. The night before Marcus moved out, we had dinner together in the kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals over the years. He'd packed most of his belongings, and the house already felt different, quieter, but also more spacious. Are you really going to sell the house? He asked as we cleaned up the dishes. I'm still thinking about it, I said honestly. I've gotten used to the idea, and some of those senior communities look really appealing. I could have neighbors my own age, activities planned if I want them, and no yard work or maintenance to worry about. But you love this house. You and Dad built your whole life here. We did, and it was wonderful for that phase of my life. But I'm in a different phase now, and maybe I need a different kind of home. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Would you be happy in one of those places? I think I might be. I think I'm ready for something new. The next morning, Marcus loaded the last of his belongings into a rented truck. Jennifer came by with Emma and Jacob to help with the move, and for the first time in years, our interaction felt natural and friendly. Grandma Vivian! Emma ran up to hug me. Daddy says we're going to visit you once a month and that you might teach me how to sew. I would love to teach you how to sew, I told her, surprised by how much I meant it. We could start with something simple, maybe a pillowcase for your new room at Daddy's apartment. As I watched Marcus drive away toward his new life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation for what came next. That afternoon, I called Janet and told her I'd decided not to sell the house after all. Are you sure? She asked. You seemed pretty excited about downsizing. I was excited about the idea of change, I said. But I realized I can create change without leaving my home. I can redecorate. I can travel more. I can use my space exactly the way I want to use it. 3 months later, I'd transformed the guest room back into my sewing sanctuary, but with improvements. I'd bought a new cutting table and better lighting. I'd organized my supplies in beautiful glass jars that looked like art when displayed on floating shelves. I'd even bought a comfortable reading chair where I could sit and plan my projects. The room was no longer just functional. It was beautiful, a reflection of my personality and interests, rather than just a place to store things. My sewing business had grown too. Word of mouth from satisfied customers had brought me more work than I could handle. I'd even started teaching basic sewing classes at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try, but never had time for, when I was constantly managing Marcus's needs. Helen came for her usual summer visit and was amazed by the changes in the house and in me. "You seem different," she said as we sat in the newly decorated living room, which now featured artwork I'd chosen and furniture arranged according to my preferences rather than Marcus's gaming setup. "I feel different," I admitted. "I feel like I'm living my own life instead of just supporting someone else's." "And Marcus, how is he adjusting to independence?" "Better than I expected. He calls a couple of times a week, not because he needs something, but because he wants to talk. He tells me about his apartment, his work, his dates. It's like having a relationship with him as an adult instead of as a dependent child." Emma and Jacob had visited the previous weekend, and we'd spent Saturday afternoon in my sewing room. Emma had indeed started learning to sew, and Jacob had helped me organize my button collection by color and size. They'd seemed genuinely interested in my work, asking questions about how the sewing machine worked and whether I could teach them to make clothes for their stuffed animals. "It's amazing what happens when you stop being convenient and start being intentional," Helen observed. That evening, as Helen and I sat on the front porch watching the sunset, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to a year ago. I'd been so focused on being a good mother and grandmother that I'd forgotten how to be a complete person. The book club had become a highlight of my week. I'd joined a watercolor painting class at the community college. I'd started volunteering at the local animal shelter, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I'd even taken a weekend trip to visit my cousin in Nashville, something that would have been impossible when I was constantly accommodating Marcus's schedule. "Do you ever regret standing up to him?" Helen asked. I considered the question seriously. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it took me so long to do it. I regret that I let him treat my home like his personal hotel for 3 years, but I don't regret setting boundaries." "Even when it was difficult?" "Especially when it was difficult. The difficult conversations are usually the ones that change everything for the better." As I prepared for bed that night, I walked through my house slowly, appreciating the quiet spaces that belonged completely to me. The guest room where Helen was sleeping comfortably in a real bed instead of on an air mattress in my former office. The living room arranged according to my aesthetic preferences. The kitchen where I could cook what I wanted, when I wanted, without worrying about accommodating someone else's schedule or dietary preferences. This was what home was supposed to feel like, not just a roof over your head, but a reflection of your values, your interests, your vision of how life should be lived. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Thanks for dinner last Sunday. The kids are still talking about their sewing lesson with Grandma. Looking forward to next month's visit." I smiled as I typed back, "Me too. Sleep well." At 58 years old, I'd finally learned that being a good mother didn't require sacrificing my entire identity, that loving my family didn't mean disappearing into their needs. That gratitude was something that should flow both ways in healthy relationships. The day my son told me I should be grateful for a spare room in my own house was indeed the day I decided he needed to learn what gratitude really meant. But it was also the day I learned something important about myself, that I was worth standing up for, that my needs mattered, and that it's never too late to reclaim your own life. And for that lesson, despite everything, I was truly grateful.